Chris, welcome back.
Hey, Kerry, it's good to be back with you and all your listeners today.
Hey, so adult supervision. You were telling me about a book, fascinating book you've been reading.
Yeah, it's by a guy named Yanis Varoufakis, who was the Greek finance minister. People may remember that this new party in Greece got voted in, overwhelmingly called the Syriza Party, and what they were going to do was they were going to just call a spade and say, hey, look, we've got a whole bunch of debts. We're not saying it was right or wrong, or maybe it was wrong, but anyway, here they are. We can't pay them back, so let's work something out. And he was accused because he was so intransigent, because he just kept, using the numbers in these big high level board meetings with, the trilateral commission, such as it is. You got your people out of Brussels, you got the Bundesbank, you got your IMF types. And so Giannis was just trying to get some rational stuff injected in, and he was accused of, not being an adult in the room. We need adults in the room. I can't remember who said that, but it might have been Christine Lagarde. I think it was, right? So, what he says in this book is pretty fascinating, and it comports with a lot of what he's been saying in interviews and whatnot. He's like, look, you'd all like to think these people know what they're doing, but they don't. Capitalism completely died in 2008. It was replaced with something entirely different. And, we no longer have anything that remotely looks like capital going where it needs to under rules that make sense. And they make up the rules as they're going along. But the biggest charge he leveled, Kerry, was that they don't know what they're doing, except they're all, with the doors closed, they all know it's going to break at some point, and break very badly. So everything they're doing is either the work of evil geniuses, or people who are just trying to kick the can another week down the road. And I think that's where we are, right? You saw the markets break just a couple of weeks back around the Italy thing. It was fixed by 2:30 that same afternoon. The U.S. stock market didn't even spend a full day down, and then it was off to the races afterwards. We saw that right after the Trump election. We saw it in 2016 early. What we're seeing are market rescues after market rescues by people who are really desperately afraid of what happens if the markets go down. And that's just a ridiculous place to be in. And the longer they do it, you know what happens. The more you get populism, the more you get the people are starting to figure out, hey, we're getting the short end of this stick. You all are printing money, handing it out to yourselves. You're all getting rich and made whole. My life is getting harder as a consequence. I don't have opportunities. And so that's really the larger story. But it was interesting to get that insider's perspective from that book, Adults in the Room, basically confirming what you and I have always suspected. There really aren't any adults in the room.
Yeah,
Nobody knows what they're doing. And this is all destined to fail at some point.
Hey, well, we've been down this road before. We know what pretty much is going to happen. There's kind of no way out of it. But it would just be nice if somebody really just faced the people, and said a little honesty. A little honesty can go a long, long way. But we don't have any openness or honesty anymore. It's just like you said, everyone pursuing their own interests until the whole thing collapses.
Well, yes. And, Kerry, I would also love that. Let's put balance where balance is due. Listen, it would be great if the governor of Illinois and other people came forward and spoke plainly with the people of Illinois about how bad the pension situation is. But it's also kind of on the people of Illinois to be able to read a statement or read a newspaper article and figure that out for themselves. Like, I would not live there or in many other states which are really near term and huge pension disasters, because I know that's going to be real ugly when it gets there, right? Skyrocketing taxes, plummeting services, just the whole spiral of death, right? But it's kind of on both parties, right? Don't you think?
Yeah.
I think individual responsibility is an important element here too.
Hey, well, we could get into the dumbing down of America. We could talk about that for hours. And the fact is that very few people really grasp the magnitude of the situation. Don't understand it.
No, it's absolutely true. And I don't know why that is because, the data's there. It's not hard to come by. Anybody can sort of read about it. But at the same time, let's be clear about this. We live in a country, and I think most Western people do, and I think the UK is even worse down this spectrum than we are here, where all of our major media has been very heavily propagandized. It's sophisticated, it's clever, it's inaccurate, it's misleading, and it's emotionally manipulative. It's all of those things. What we're not getting out of our mass media is anything remotely like the truth or a prioritized sense of what we ought to be looking at. It's almost like, CNN is an enforced experience of adult hyperactive disorder,
Oh my
right?
God.
It's just ADHD. You have the little scroll bar going at the bottom. There's like different stories.
Yeah.
Oh my God, there's a car chase somewhere in Nevada. It has no bearing on anything, right?
Yeah.
And so, if you ever want to know what it's like to live with ADHD, just watch CNN for a while and try and, make sense of the world through that portal. It's practically impossible.
Well, the CNN, MSNBC, and the mainstream media in general does what I call disconnecting the dots. It used to be their job to actually connect the dots, do investigative journalism, and give you a perspective, give you things in perspective. Now their job is totally to deceive you and disconnect the dots so that you won't connect them on your own. And you see this constantly over and over and over again. And yet people fall for it, although less and less, Chris. You have to admit their audiences are dissolving. They've been obliterated, especially after the past campaign, right?
Well, it couldn't happen to a nicer bunch of jerks, as far as I'm concerned. I confess to a very strong case of Schadenfreude every time I watch CNN's viewership numbers decline a little bit further into oblivion. But at the same time, I agree. People are sort of tuning that out. That's well and good. But I'm sure you saw that suicides are up 35% over the last, I forget what the time period is. I think it's maybe 10 or 15 years or something. And that's just the active suicides. And then you have other ways that people commit suicide by overdosing on opioids or drinking themselves to death or what have you. So a lot of people are really unhappy with the situation, but there hasn't been a way for them to organize or find a way to apply their energies into this. And that's why, one of the most recent pieces I wrote it just went up on the website. This one's completely free. It's really saying, we need a movement of some kind here, because if you look at all the trajectories of various things, they're all getting worse, not better, right? How's the overall indebtedness level? That's getting worse. Where are we really on the ecological side with insects disappearing or what's happening with acidification in the oceans? That's all getting worse. So you just track those trends, Carrie, and everybody, I think, knows in their heart of hearts that ends badly. And that's a demoralizing place to be when you realize that your larger life has no purpose and there's nothing you can do about it and you feel powerless and all of that, which is why people need to realize we're not powerless. We need to remember that again. We need to get back in the driver's seat in this whole thing. I know it looks monolithic and like, how could you possibly, take on the swamp in D.C. plus its handmaidens in the MSM? But we have to, because the alternative is to just sort of give up. You might as well, screw it, just party if that's your attitude, But if you want to leave the world a better place, if you want to be part of what's going to happen, history's being made right now. We have two paths in front of us. One of them goes pretty badly as far as I'm concerned. The other one, is not yet written, but we have choices here and we're not taking them yet.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know what Yogi Berra said, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. So
yeah, he was so wise.
Yeah, I'll tell you, it's a little disconcerting, but not everyone doesn't have a sense of purpose or a sense of belonging or this. It's really what you're describing, Chris, is alienation. Alienation from society, alienation from your family, from your kids. I mean, that is part of our malaise for sure, but it's not the entire country. And some people still do have a sense of worth and value, whether it comes from religion or family or work or wherever it might come from. I don't think that situation is hopeless, But it is disconcerting to see all these people in their prime of life deciding to cash it in, if you will. Although, some of the recent suicides could be of questionable origins without getting into conspiracy theories.
Well, I'll tell you, Kerry, this isn't to sort of point to this malaise and say it's hopeless. The hope on that side of the story for me is that that represents, I think there's millions of people, millions and millions, tens of millions that are unhappy with the current course. And if you could just get candidates out who could somehow make it through the ringer of our system in the United States and could come forward, I honestly think there's a lot of fuel for real change at this point. And that's, that fuel comes from people who are feeling that alienation, right? You're not part of this larger story. You're not connected to it. Your role is meaningless, right? That's demoralizing. So guess what? I think that, we have to reverse a lot of these trends at some point in time. We can't have the 0.01% constantly vacuuming up all the new Federal Reserve monies that come through. We can't have Wall Street making bank, the whole time times are good and getting bailed out every time times get bad, and we clearly have to dismantle a huge proportion of our financialized economy because it's just too much. The parasites are just too strong. And so those are things I think people could organize around.
Yeah, the parasites are on the verge of bringing down the host. And that's not a smart parasite. Parasite, takes just enough so that the host doesn't really notice it. And the host's continued viability is assured. But we've gotten past that point to where the host is on the verge of going into, cardiac arrest here, or having their blood sucked out of them. And
well, just consider this, like minimum wage, almost impossible in practically every major city to get by on minimum wage, right? So you'd have to hold multiple jobs, all that. So let's just, whether saying, how we would get a more fair wage, leave that aside. This year's Wall Street bonuses, if you add them up, were equivalent to every single minimum wage worker's entire paycheck for the whole year. All however many million of those people working, their entire take-home pay was the same as about 3,000 or 4,000 people who basically click buttons and parasite off of the economy. They produce nothing and they skim like crazy. So that's where I don't know. I'm not proposing that you take the bonuses and give them to minimum wage people. I'm just saying when you have that level of disparity, that's where social tensions come in. That's where, you're starting to read more articles by people going, hey, maybe civil war is a possibility, because you can feel it, right? People are so polarized, so unable, like so anti-Trump or pro-Trump, and they can't see each other or whatever the story is. My view is that really the piece under that, Kerry, that's driving all of this is that people can feel that their larger story is broken. So we have to blame it on somebody. And, I don't get involved in politics because I think it's a waste of time. The real shocking things that happen in this country are all courtesy of the Federal Reserve and the large banking system. That's like 80% of the major shocks that happen in people's lives. That's it right there.
Couldn't agree with you more. And the politics just reflect the economics and not the other way around. But hey, look, Italy got a populist government and they're shutting off the illegal immigrant flow. And it's a real threat to the EU. It's a Eurosceptic government. So it shows you that even though it appears there's no political solution for what ails the planet, sometimes politics maybe can help and maybe can crystallize the need for change.
Well, absolutely. And there was just a really astonishing 212-kilometer long bridge of hands. 200 kilometers of people in Spain, the Basques looking for another vote on separation. And all of those political movements are really coming forward and saying, hey, it's time for us to rest our our control, our destiny, our culture back. We need to have local control of that. If you can call a country as large as Italy local,
Yeah.
right? But that's what they need. And of course, you saw the Brussels finance minister come out, Ettinger, and say the markets will teach the Italians how to vote next time, right? So using financialization as a weapon to promote or enforce a specific political outcome, how is that not financial terrorism?
Yeah, that's weaponization of the political system, of the economic system. We've seen all of this happen here in the U.S., of the intelligence agencies. It's all been weaponized. And, the financial system was supposed to be a means to allocate capital to the most worthy and needy entities. And it's become something so perverse and so unrecognizable. And now we're going to use it to punish voters for exercising their right of choice. There's something really wrong with the system when that's happening.
Absolutely. And so when I say, it's time for a movement, I mean, we really do need a movement where again, this isn't, we need to vote in a couple extra new people. That'll do something. I mean, we need a movement to say, maybe it's inappropriate to have a small cabal of unelected officials with deep conflicts of interest, setting large economic targets and parameters and attempting to price everything in the markets. Hey, the Soviets tried it, didn't work for them. Hey, we're trying it. We're getting the same bad results. Maybe we should not allow that. So, I think the End the Fed movement is a great thing. I love the idea of how Bitcoin and other digital assets have come forward simply because they have people talking about money. You get people, younger people going, scarcity is important. And wait, you have to know who's running it, what their motivations are. These are all appropriate questions to be asking about assets, in particular, your currency. So I'm a big fan of all of that. But, I'm of a view on those that, if the government decides they become a threat, you just watch what happens next. I'm a little leery of that whole process, of course.
We have ways of making you talk. Yeah. Well, you ask the average person on the street, what are the 5 characteristics of money? You know that nobody can answer it except somebody who digs back in their memory cells, had an economics class where they explained it. But the good thing about cryptocurrencies is people are relearning what money is and how it's created, and alternatives to government-backed, government-issued fiat currency. That's a really good thing because, when you go into a convenience store, the gas station, and you swipe your credit card in the pump, the average person does not. You don't understand. You just created the money to pay for your gas, or to put it accurately, the bank just created, if it cost you $50, the bank just created $50 out of thin air to pay the gas station for your gas, and they got their cut of it, their 3% or whatever they get for merchant processing. And then when you figure out, hey, there's other ways of doing this that don't involve government-sanctioned outlets or printing presses or money printers, all of a sudden the world becomes a different place to you, Chris.
Well, it does. And, people used to very heartily and vigorously debate the role of money because it's really important. Money is power, and it's the way we store our collective efforts, and it has to adhere to certain principles. And if they get abused, history repeats. So here we are, and I'm convinced this monetary experiment that's just been run is going to be the most destructive, bar none, in all of human history. It's going to take anything that, any of the Roman emperors did and just put them to shame. It'll take anything Zimbabwe did, put it to shame, because ultimately money is it's a social contract. It's an agreement. And you and I have to have an agreement about its relative value and all of that other stuff. We can do that in the open marketplace. But when, ultimately at the end of the day, your financial assets, your currency, your money units, they have to balance against real stuff, right? And so if you're growing your monetary aggregates at 8, 9, 10%, which we are, and your economy is growing at 2 or 3%, you're just piling up claims on something exponentially. And it's been going on long enough that there was ever a sudden accounting, and I think this is what they're afraid of. If there was ever a sudden accounting, we'd discover that there are far too many claims compared to stuff, to real things, right? What do we got? $240 trillion of debt, just debt, in the world against a world economy of maybe 80 trillion, right? That's very hard to balance.